Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Boys in the Boat, starring Joel Egerton, Callum Turner, Peter Guinness, Sam Strike, and a whole lot of other people I'm not too familiar with. Maybe I've seen them in things but don't remember them in it. Directed by George Clooney. Now, I remember seeing the trailer for this thinking this could be interesting, so I decided to do the George Clooney retrospective by leading up to this movie, and I have seen it twice and both times is pleasant. Well, you'll see what I mean when I get into the movie. Let's just get straight into it. We start with the grandchild of the main character, who I'm going to talk about in a second, in his future, as the grandchild is rowing his boat and but is distracted by people passing by him as the grandfather looks up, and we move on to the year of 1936 in the Great Depression in Seattle, Washington, and a younger Joe Rance, played by Callum Turner, getting a degree in college while living in his car, and the score by Alexandre Desplat, who I've admired a lot of his scores, is pretty good in this movie, as I like this score from start to finish. Joe has a class with his friend Roger Morris, who disrupts the class and eyes on a girl he had a crush on since fourth grade named Joyce Simdars, and Joe struggles on getting a job in order to pay for his education, as the lady in the desk tells him he has 2 weeks to pay for his education or else he'll get kicked out of the school, which was never brought up again, which kind of bothered me, kind of. Joyce talks with Joe while he studies and is nervous until Roger comes up to Joe and tells him a way to make some money, and is hoping a team on a sport called crew, which, in case if anybody doesn't know what that is, think of it as 8 or maybe 9 men on a boat singing "Row, row, row your boat gently down the street. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream." And they to audition for the sport and meet Coach Al Ulbrichtson, played by Joel Egerton, as a couple of other coaches, and they have to pick 9 men or maybe eight, I forget how many it was, to row a boat for the crew. And they take a practice, and I like the characters as they come off pretty interesting to watch, as this is like an underdog story, like the first Rocky film, for example, but for the sport of crew is the only difference. The next day, Joe and Roger go to school and they fall asleep until Joyce wakes them up, and we move on to another day of crew practice as they row the boat pretty intensely while they try to go faster on a boat, and director George Clooney does a good job at telling an underdog story. As I'm a fan of that kind of movie, Joe makes the team with Don Hume, Shorty Hunt, Jim McMillan, Chuck Day, Roger, as I already brought up, Bobby Mock, and Johnny White and Gordy Adam. So that's technically 9. And they celebrate together, get to know each other, and Joe taking Joyce on a boat ride. And the cinematography is pretty good, as this is a good looking movie with inspiration. They practice and practice and practice as a team the next day until they go as fast as possible. And at the end of the day, Joe helps George Pocock, played by Peter Guinness, making the boat they're using as a team and make it look fresh and new. And I really like this story for the way it's told. Coach Al is inspired by pushing the crew to row as fast as they can, thanks to George, and makes Bobby the driver of the boat while guiding the others. And Coach Al tells them to row the boat, or else he's off the team for good. And they do, while Joe tells George how his mother died when he was younger and never kept touch with his father, which is sad. But this rowing the boat scenes is inspiring, especially if he wants to join the team. Coach Al introduces the crew team, the boat they're riding on, and they race against Cal, as in California, with Coach Kai Ebright and Joyce watching Joe, and they start off slowly at first, but eventually they row the boat faster and beat California, which feels like any underdog story, despite it's a little predictable at times. I'm going with the movie at this point, as I'm having a good time viewing it both times. The crewmates go to a party to celebrate their first victory, with Joyce celebrating with them, and Joyce wants to take Joe to her dorm room, I'll say, and almost gets busted for having a meal over at her dorm. Meanwhile, one of the crewmates, Don Hume, as we hear earlier in the movie, or learn, I'll say, he can play the piano pretty well, and he does, and I like these scenes as Don is a good piano player, while Joe and Joyce's chemistry is very beautiful to watch, as their screen time works together pretty damn well. Coach Al is afraid of how fast their next opponent will be at the water, seeing his crew's close, and the crewmates continuing rowing the boat and talk about rowing the boat for the Olympics in Berlin, which happens to be in Germany, while Hitler was the president of Germany. And Coach Al is expecting the impossible from the crewmates, and because this is an underdog story, it makes sense. Coach Al makes a speech about going to the Olympics for Berlin with a junior boat, and some people are outraged and his bosses don't approve and almost gets him fired. But Coach Al knows what he's doing while on a date with Joyce, and by he, I'm talking about Joe. Joe sees his father come back from California for 2 years and never got in touch with him all this time, and he disses him once again. And I'm thinking, what kind of a father is he? As that scene was heartbreaking. While Coach Al, I feel like he knows what he's doing at this point, while his wife distracts him for one night by going to bed with her, and that is a cute scene. The crew makes mates the crewmates take off on a train to a crew race, and Joyce says I love you to Joe as he walks away at first and gets on the train to his race without saying anything to her. And I'm thinking, don't tell me he didn't say I love you back to her, as that wouldn't make much sense, as it looked like he ignored her. But he goes back out and tells her I love you and kisses her on the lips and gets back on the train before it ever takes off without him, which was sweet of Joe to come back and say it to her. Joe almost beats up one of his crewmates, but the crewmate tells him about his old man while he didn't mean anything by it, which was a heartbreaking scene. Joe acts out with Bobby and Coach Al and his other crewmates as he's having some daddy issues and gets kicked off the team briefly and having someone else take over for Joe's seat. And Roger tries to tell Coach Al to get his spot back while George asks Joe for help with the boat, and they chat about fatherhood and putting some faith into his crewmates as well as his father is a quitter, and Joe tells Coach Al's he is nothing without the boat as well as his crewmates, and it convinces Coach Al to put him back on the team, and they row the boat against a few teams, with Cal being one of them, California. And I swear, every time they focus on the pieces of the boat, like a screw is going to be loose, every single time they showed that, it made me a tad bit nervous. Like something is going to break, which really made me nervous. They win the race, but one issue is Coach Al has to raise $5,000 in 1 week for the boys to go to Berlin for being in the Olympics. And Coach Al is upset, so people donate money for the boys to go to the Olympics in Berlin, as the whole town is inspired to donate money, and I like the acting in these scenes. While the city of Seattle is donating money for the Olympics, Joe's father donating some. Meanwhile, Coach Al is worried they're $300 short and have 4 hours left, and Coach Kai from California donates $300 to make them go to Berlin. And as the boys go to Berlin, and Hitler is one of the audience members in the opening ceremony, Jesse Owens is one of the Olympians for being the fastest runner in history. Yes, we get a cameo of him, and I have seen that biopic movie that is about Jesse Owens called Race. And if you've never seen it, go check it out on Netflix. It's a good movie. And if you like this movie like I am so far, I recommend you guys check that movie out while it's streaming on Netflix, despite I haven't seen it since theaters. They start racing against the different Olympian crews. Don is not feeling well as he races with the team and watches the German crew on their boat as they're pretty damn fast. And Don is once again feeling dehydrated, and Coach Al wants him to rest and to stay away from Don. And the boys practice rowing the boat while the Olympics change the rules for crew for some reason at all. As we get the final showdown, and Dunn is with them rowing the boat while Hitler watches the boys in the boats rowing, and they keep showing the screws like they're going to break one on them, which did feel pretty irritating at times, but luckily the boat doesn't break on them and they start slowly like they usually do, but at the end of it they finish it by going faster than even the Germans. It's as it gets neck to neck when they score to the finish line with the boys from America and Germany, and they take a photo to see who wins, and the judges say America wins the race, as well as the gold medal, and celebrate as Hitler walks away. Kind of amusing. And we go back to elderly Joe with his grandkid, asking if he'll ever row a boat and crew like he did, and he hopes so. And the climax was inspiring while intense, and I had a good time with the movie at the end of the day. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 6.8 out of 10. This is a good looking movie with inspiration, as I like the characters, and director George Clooney does a good job with an underdog story, as I'm a fan of movies like that, as it works well. I like the story for the way it's told, and I like the score Alexandre Desplat puts together, as I'm starting to be a fan of his at around the time The Shape of Water, when I did that review way back when I did the Guillermo del Toro series, as this movie is pretty inspiring. The only thing that bugged me was the way it never brings back the school and the screws and then after they started crewing together, and also whenever they showed the screws on the boat, that made me a little nervous. But this is a good movie with an inspiring true underdog story, and I'm giving this movie a recommendation for telling a true underdog story that actually happened during the Great Depression, and it's inspiring. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for George Clooney's directorial debut, and until we get another one, good night.